want to get into the ramifications of this in just a minute, but let me ask you on a more micro level what it means for you as you look ahead to the midterms. Your district, the 6th district in Louisiana, very much at the center of this case.
Well, I tell people all the time the issue is not whether or not Cleo Fields serve another day in Congress, but whether or not a person who looks like me have an opportunity to serve in Congress. I think the governor and the attorney general put the cart before the horse. I mean, the Supreme Court decision is not really a final judgment until, the 25-day elapse for people to file, the parties rather, to file some type of rehearing. That time has not elapsed. And, people have already started voting in Louisiana. Qualifying has been had. 100,000 ballots has been sent to people not only in Louisiana but overseas. Thousands of them have already cast their ballots, and to hold an election up because there is a ruling from the Supreme Court, to me, is unconscionable, to say the least.
Justin Kagan, in her dissent, warned that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is now a, quote, dead letter. I'm wondering if you agree that this ruling effectively ends the era of creating these majority-minority districts in the South.
Oh, I agree. I mean, you couldn't have a more horrible decision. I mean, and really, people in the southern part of our country, the whole purpose of the Voting Rights Act was to protect them. There was a time, in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, in order to register to vote, although you had the constitutional right to register to vote and be a voter in this country, there were states like Louisiana that had all types of prerequisites. You had to state the preamble to the Constitution, literacy tests.
Yeah.
Some even required poll taxes. You had to own property. Those were unconscionable measures that many southern states took, and thus that's why Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it for good reason. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether or not some of those same tactics take place today, and I would say in the southern part of our country, the answer is absolutely yes. They're not literacy tests, but there are all types of obstacles that many African Americans are faced with in order to access the voting box. The other thing, the real proof in the pudding is how many African Americans have been elected to Congress from, let's just take Louisiana, for example. 0, not one. How many have run? Many. So at the end of the day, and to move the test from, it has to show intent and not effect, I just think that's wrong, too, because, who's to determine what was the intent of the legislature? What about what's the effect of what the legislature did? And in this case, I was in the legislature when the bill passed. We're from a state that has, Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and only one female member of Congress. The members of the legislature wanted to protect those individuals, and that's perfectly clear. Okay. And thus, that's why the district ended up the way it ended up. I just think it's a horrible decision. And what's worse, to postpone the elections that had already started, that disenfranchised people. And I hope the court ultimately rule that you just can't hold up the elections. You need to go forward because they had already started. The bill had already run.
I said I'd start micro, and I'm going to go macro. I think a consequence of this is a level of confusion about the way that congressional districts are drawn in this country and when they're drawn, and perhaps that's the point, that politicians are trying to sow confusion among the electorate. But I imagine it's incumbent upon you and other Democrats now at this moment to explain to voters why this, as you see it, is a bad judgment. It needs to change. What's your prescription for doing that going forward? What do Democrats need to do here as they look at a Voting Rights Act that has been, as I said, hollowed out not just by this decision that affected Section 2, but other facets of it as well?
Well, I would think that the next Congress, the new Congress, should pass a Voting Rights Act that really have teeth. Don't leave anything up for question for the Supreme Court. Make it clear and unambiguous. And really deal with Section 5. Section 5 was gutted in 2013 through the Holder case. 5 was so important to states like Louisiana. We could always depend on the federal government to defend us when we were, when our vote, when legislators were trampling on our rights to access the voting box. And that is very, very important. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Section 5, and then when they took that away, Section 2. And I tell people all the time, if you tell me I got to run a certain speed, I could perhaps do that. Tell me I got to jump a certain height, I could perhaps do that. But if you tell me I have to be white to be a member of Congress, I need help from the federal government. And thus, that's the whole purpose of the Voting Rights Act. And I think the Supreme Court was just absolutely wrong. I think Congress should move with all expediency to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and just leave nothing for question for the Supreme Court. And not to mention, I really think at this day and age, we need to probably put term limits on the Supreme Court, because these justices are now acting as lawmakers, and they ought not do that. They are there only to interpret the law, not to make it. And there are too many justices that are making law in this country. And I do think that, there should be some question as to whether or not, Supreme Court justices are limited in terms of their term.
Congressman, before we let you go, I do want to ask you, when you look at the wider map and these redistricting efforts, obviously this latest round kicked off in Texas, where they redistricted to get 5 GOP votes. Then that was countered in California, where they got 5 Democratic potential districts. Virginia has got 5 new potential Democratic districts. Florida will likely get 4, and there's a handful of others in Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Utah. I am a surprising, possibly Democratic district in Utah. But I'm wondering if you have any concerns that you might be trying to win the battle and lose the war as you open the floodgates for more redistricting, more of this gerrymandering, and if that's partly responsible for the bipartisan nature of politics in 2026.
Well, it's a race to the bottom. It's when the president of the United States picks up the phone and calls the governor of Texas and say, I need 5 more Republican seats. And then the governor of Texas just call the legislature into session to do just that. What do you think? Wherever there is an action, there's always a reaction. And then Democrats react to that. Look, we shouldn't have mid-decade redistricting. We just really shouldn't have it. The whole purpose of redistricting is based on the census. Every 10 years, we have census in this country, and we apportion seats based on population. And we shouldn't have mid-decade redistricting in this country. It's too political, and it's wrong, and it's not fair to voters. It just brings about more voter confusion. People don't know who their representatives are. And I just think we need to stop it, and we need to stop it right now.
A quick question, unrelated to this. You sit on the House Financial Services Committee. You're on the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Monetary Policy. You're here on Bloomberg. I want to ask you about the news of the week. That is that Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is going to stick around as governor going forward. What do you make of that decision? And now that investigation by the DOJ has been punted over to the Inspector General at the Fed, are you satisfied, like it seems like Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina was, that the institution and the soon-to-be former chair are no longer as imperiled as they might have been a few weeks ago?
Yeah, look, we have to put in confidence in our financial institutions, and I'm happy that Chairman Powell is sticking around. There's no reason for him to leave. That was really no purpose in the investigation to begin with. And we got to stop weaponizing the Department of Justice. That was just wrong. If you don't like somebody, if the president doesn't like somebody in this country, he sicks the Justice Department on the person. That was an unfair, un-American attack to begin with. And Chairman Powell should stay as long as the law gives him the right to stay, and I applaud him for doing so.